But yeah,
I feel like
that trailer was very...
I feel like what a lot of mainstream domestic horror movies don't get is just like how much power there is in not in things being slow or things being still or things being silent. Like, I remember watching the early Marble Hornets shorts, and the scariest things happened when there was no audio, where you just saw the perspective of someone going around their pitch black house and seeing something standing outside and then turning its head real fast.
Yeah.
And that was with absolutely no sound. Just the fact that it was so engrossing and so effective with absolute silence. I feel like that's something that is underappreciated.
Yeah, and I mean, the way, granted, they're a series and they have the luxury of doing this, but they executed it and thought well enough to make it the sort of series that makes you feel more sort of dready and paranoid as time goes on. So every little moment counts, you know? It's like you don't even necessarily have to have like a really big one because you're so sort of fraught with the tone. And, you know, I think that's sort of an issue. I feel like there's a nice parallel there when you look at the haunts and stuff, because it's like, you know, it's like I love Universal, but Universal is, you know, it's a lot of pop-outs. You know, it's very much driven by pop-outs and cool scenes, and then you go over to something like, you know, if you take the middle leap, you go to something like the Queen Mary, and then you go further and you go to something like Alone or something like, you know, one of these more specialty houses that are, you know, semi-art installations. It's kind of a nice parallel for that. Because American horror, you know, American domestic horror can be kind of like a fun house. It's kind of like we jumped out at you and now we're going to keep going, you know, and we're going to jump out again. And they're like X amount of scares. Whereas you hop over to some of the smaller ones and some of the sort of more foreign ones, they know how to take their time and to build dread. Like, we've forgotten about dread in place of scares, a little bit at least. And so, you know, to build dread and suspense and paranoia, I mean, it takes time and it takes, you know, characters you can at least slightly genuinely identify with. And just a lot of, especially like big budget mainstream horror movies don't get the chance to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, we gotta move it along, you know? Like, a lot of the ones I've seen lately have been remakes, but just like this is just like the Poltergeist remake was like a bummer, because it was just like, come on to the next one, on to the next reference, on to the next scare, on to the next set piece. We're not going to let this breathe as a movie. We're not going to let these characters kind of breathe at all. And you know, I think that happens with a lot
drones.
And drones, yeah. So I think that happens in a lot of our at least big budget mainstream horror movies. Is they're like, well, we're spending a lot of money, so we better buy the fanciest one, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like the smaller ones get to take more of their time. And a lot of the sort of more out there fringy ones. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Sad.
Yeah, sorry. Was that too long of a diatribe?
No, you hit the nail on the head.
All right. As long as the parallel works, man. But yeah, no, I mean that shot in like the Gallows trailer, like, I do agree, it's sort of like, I don't know if we have enough.
It feels like Gil from The Simpsons trying to sell a horror movie.
A little bit, yeah. I'm kind of tired of, especially for found footage movies, because the thing about found footage movies too, a lot of them, granted I haven't seen The Gallows and I haven't seen some of the more recent ones, but a lot of them, especially a lot of the Paranormal Activities, space those like scary moments out. So like if you break them down on paper, there may only be like 5 or 6 scary set pieces, and a lot of the rest of it is sort of just watching the drama, and if it's, you know, compelling, then you're into it. So it's like the first Paranormal Activity movie, you're watching 2 people kind of live their life that's escalating further into chaos, and, you know, the ghost moments are few and far between, so it's like I can sort of see why on the one hand you would want to conserve your cool shit, you know, so that, you know, it's like I feel like maybe back then it still worked a little bit, just to be like, no, we've got it, but we don't want to show it to you all. And so, like, that's why I kind of cut them some slack for filming alternate scenes, because there would be trailers, like, I remember, I think Paranormal Activity 3 did this, and The Last Exorcism, maybe, Or maybe it was later than that. There are found footage movies I've seen where they will show you certain things in the trailer that are like, whoa, that's super cool. Like, ghost act, like, the ghost just picked that dude up or something.
Yeah.
And then those scenes won't appear in the movie, like a variation of that scene. So it's like, maybe it's the same location, but it's not the thing we showed you in the trailer. Like, they start doing that, and people get upset about it because it's not the moment they were expecting. But I've come to cut them some slack because I like that better than the audience reaction shot.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, we're not gonna give away our hand here, but we thought enough in advance to go, what's something else scary we can do
for the sake of the trailer that doesn't like lose the scare.
Yeah,
so
and
there is something preserved in the movie.
Yeah, and it's like
when I think about that, can you imagine like a comedy doing that where there are entirely different jokes in the final movie and they just use throwaway jokes in the trailer? It's like we don't want to have our really great jokes spoiled in the trailer, so let's do new jokes and shoot those just for the trailer.
I feel like, yeah, especially like Will Ferrell movies, like Anchorman 2, like they had a whole alternate cut where it literally is every joke is different.
Wow.
So if they had that many jokes, I feel like they should pitch the movie with that. Just take some of the extra jokes, because especially the movies that ride more on absurd comments, like you can pretty much just plug them in as you please.
Yeah, because I mean, you watch the delete scenes for like the first Anchorman, it's like, Will Ferrell will do like 90 different takes of different like exasperated like exclamations. Great Odin's beard, mighty hammer of Thor.
Yeah, hot pot of coffee.
Yes.
It's every scene. That was what it was.
Or like
a funny people type movie could benefit great from that.
I remember in 40-year-old version, like the extended scenes, there were like 10 or 12 different variations of what the daughter's boyfriend said when he walks in and sees Steve Carell with a bunch of like unwrapped condoms. And in the final movie he says, "Dude, teach me." And he has like a bunch of different lines that were like chosen for the final cut, and I think one of them was like, "Dude, those boner pills really work for you old guys," or just things like that.
Yeah, just use all those different comments.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that was when we saw Funny People. This was back when we were still allowed it at like sneak preview screenings, and we saw it like 3 times, and each time all of the jokes were different, and like whole story arcs were different.
Wow.
And that first cut we ever saw, it's such a bummer because the first cut we saw was like perfect. Like it was right in the middle. It was like he promised. It was like twice as serious and sort of like heartfelt as his other movies, and 3 times as funny is what he said, I think. I love it.
We just who is that artist?
Scott C.
Scott C. Scott C. draws these really adorable like lineups of cast members for movies, and there's one where it's oh fuck, what were their names? The mom and the kid and the Babadook from the Babadook. And he does them in this very cute little style. It looks very storybook, and Erica just found his Babadook piece. Dude, Sam and
send me that shit.
What was the mom's name in the Babadook? It was Sam and
Oh, I see. I remember the actress's name. It's Sam Davis, but I will consult the internet. But yeah, no, like Funny People was such a perfect movie the first time I saw it, and he was like, I want it to be twice as serious and 3 times as funny as my other movies, and it really was. Like that first cut was like emotionally at least a bit complex. Like it wasn't just nails on the head, and you could see everybody's conflicts, and it was like it had a perfect sort of melancholy sad the way a guy who thinks he's dying would, and like the style of the movie communicated that, whereas in the later cuts it was like lopsided. So it's more like telling us he feels that way but not making us feel it with the style of the movie as much. The comedy is a lot more overt in the new one, or in the theatrical, but the original cut, it's like they had a whole different opening. It was like the same scene. I think they must have just had a really long tape of them prank calling somebody, because they pulled different moments out of that scene. And it's like each time I saw it, the scenes also contained more cuts. So like the first time, the intro scene was one long shot, and it was great. And then they had a bunch of early stand-up sequences, because it takes place in the stand-up world, so all the main cast like does a stand-up. And like those had more time and space, and like the bits were so much better. And so, like, that whole movie had different jokes for the most part, each cut. And it was like the first cut's jokes were all great, and the movie had a lot of nuance. And then it kind of, got more conventionally funny from there, or at least a little more, sculpted by feedback and shit. But, it's
what were the better jokes that weren't in the movie? Like, what was the character of them?
I don't remember. I mean, some of it was literally just, like, those moments in the movie where they'll show the different guys, like, doing a show, so it's just their routines.
Yeah.
But, like, the routines were more charming and more funny. And, I mean, each one was different, but they picked, like, blunter jokes for the subsequent cuts, whereas these ones, like, weren't, like, flashy comedy, but they were fun and relatable and
yeah,
kind of off the beaten path of, like, traditional material. But also, like, there's the scene where he comes out of the club when he goes to the club after he's found out he's terminal.
Yeah.
Or supposed to be. He doesn't deliver, like, a super awkward, depressed, stand-up. He goes on stage and does an actual performance. It's like he hasn't done stand-up in a while, so it's a surprise to everybody. And they're like, oh, no, sure, like, we'll give you time. And he just sort of does a bit off the cuff, but, like a stand-up.
It doesn't have the awkwardness of, like, a guy who's trying
He's not having a meltdown or a
Yeah.
breakdown on stage. You can tell, like, because we've seen the prior scenes, you can see in his face, he looks like he doesn't... I don't know, it's just like he's not feeling great today.
He's not feeling great, but he's not feeling, I'm going to die.
Yeah, it's not so blunt as that. He's like, this guy may not be feeling great today, but he's still doing his routine. Like, he's still, giving us the show.
It's almost like that cut, that other take belongs in a cut where he's not terminal.
Yeah, and so, like, he gives, or that wouldn't be the first thing you would imagine is up with him. Like, maybe he just had a shitty day and he's doing this comedy now. But, it's like you can tell something's a little bit wrong, but he's still giving an actual genuine performance. And then when he meets Seth Rogen afterwards, like, it's a very human scene. There's not a whole lot of sarcasm. And then, like, just things that happen later on in the movie, like, he reads... The complaints I heard in both subsequent cuts I saw were, like, he comes off as more of a dick. Whereas in the original one, like, it still allows him to get unreasonable, but it's not so far that you're like, this character's just a dick now. You're like... Okay, I get how this problem happened, to these people. Like, I get how, the worst parts of their personalities amplified, perhaps, and the things that... It's just not as blunt force. So he's a little more understandable in the original cut than he is in the later ones. And it's just not always like, I am sad. It's a little more like, I'm, the trouble. It's that more tired sigh in the middle, So it was just like it was a much more nuanced picture. But I feel like for movies like that, it's like that's what those extra jokes are for. Is like, pitch some of those out so that we get the tone of the scene and the scenery. But, don't necessarily give us the exact, thing we're going to see. Because then you can sort of cheat not blowing the surprise.
I feel like and then I think of, what's the power of making a movie that's so different from the trailer? And I feel like you can't do that with a mainstream movie because you gotta sell what's in. You gotta say on the box what's in the box.
Yeah.
You gotta do if you're like making some indie art house film, you can pull like Michael Haneke's Funny Games, where the trailer looks like this is a conventional, home invasion slasher, and then the movie is saying fuck you for wanting to come see a hyper-violent home invasion slasher.
I mean, I see the only time I feel like at least the bigger studios will misadvertise a movie is when they have they don't think it's gonna work.
And they don't get the movie itself.
Yeah, because, like, The Grey is a perfect example of that, of,
We're
like...
sold on punching wolves instead of coming to grips with death.
Yeah, and so, like, I saw the trailer, and I will fully admit, the silly 12-year-old in me saw the trailer and went, dude, Liam Neeson's gonna punch wolves in the face? Nice! Like, in a silly way. I was like, yeah, I'll go watch that. And then I saw it, and I was like, this is much more not that movie. It's, like, much more sort of existential and harrowing than that movie, and a lot of people were disappointed that it wasn't that movie, and it got crammed into January, and I was just like, if you would just advertise this movie with even a modicum of just, how dramatic it is. You know,
Yeah.
I think you could have just
I'm trying to imagine
put that out in September.
I'm trying to imagine how The Edge was advertised back in the day, because that's another one of those movies where, you know, the box to The Edge, the box art and the poster to The Edge looks like it's Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins going nuts in the woods and crazy shit is going down, whereas the majority of the movie is these guys having to try and be crafty and, you know, dealing with their interpersonal stuff and more character-y things. Yeah, it's like the cover. Jerry just pulled up the image for what The Edge's one sheet looked like, and it's Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins yelling when it's like the point of the movie is...
Well, they've both got their teeth gnashed.
Yeah.
Like something real's going on.
And it's like there's one... Like there's one action sequence. It's basically them being hunted by a bear for a bit as just this kind of far-off threat. But the main problem is how they're trying to get back to civilization and how they're trying to deal with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's... We'd have to look at the trailer. Because part of me thinks, when was this movie made?
It was like the 90s.
Okay.
I want to say it's like 97.
97, yeah.
Oh, I was right. I was right, 97.
Maybe not then, because trailers have changed over time, and it's kind of fun to watch and study them. Because, you know, I feel like a movie like that could have worked maybe really well in the 70s or something like that, when we weren't afraid to advertise stuff that was just raw, man.
Yeah.
Because, like, now...
Easy Rider.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and all those... There are a lot of movies from that era that are, you know, very sort of disconcerting, and things just happen, and life is very... I don't know. I always get a more existential vibe from the 70s. But, like... I feel like some of these survival in the wild movies could have just sort of breathed in that time, because movies were allowed to just unfold then, and that's kind of just what you're watching is things unfold. Whereas now, you know, you kind of have to advertise this like an action flick because that's what we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
You know, not a lot of movies get space to just unfold anymore.
I saw an article recently that was basically like why every movie is the same nowadays, and it was basically pointing out just like it feels like before the past, like, maybe 10 or 15 years, structure was just, like, an option.
Yeah.
Nowadays, traditional structure is considered a requirement. And this article chalks it up to the explosion of Save the Cat.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would definitely... If it didn't... If
it didn't start with Robert McKee's story, or if it didn't start with George Lucas giving the shout-out to Joseph Campbell after the success of Star Wars, that Liberty Bell cracking ring was really like thrown by Save the Cat.
Well, yeah, because after Star Wars and after, you know, he name-checked Joseph Campbell, and it's like there were a lot of that structured movie.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of movies that were allowed to not be.
Yeah.
You know, and thinking back, it's like I was growing up during the 90s, but from the 90s cinema I've gone back for, and from the things I remember seeing, you know, there was still, like, stuff still got funded if it was a bit strange.
Yeah.
You know, and funding strange stuff is...
The Truman Show.
Yeah. And
like, that was still a very mainstream movie, but it was heady.
Yeah. And, like...
Pleasantville. It was a mainstream movie, but it was still heady.
Hell yeah, Pleasantville.
Hell yeah is my jam. I love that fucking movie.
Well, and I mean, I even went back and watched Candyman, which, like, Candyman is... It's 90s as fuck, but...
Be my victim.
Yeah. And
Tony Todd.
And I'd always seen him just put up with other slashers, but I watched that movie and I was like, oh, this is Clive Barker, though. Like, this is actually quite dark, and it's kind of, you know, at least probing things that aren't in the most comfortable realms of conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to totally butcher the history of Candyman because I can't really recite you some of the story, but, like, there's, like, a slavery plotline or something in there that, you know...
And that's, like, very... Like, that's not shied away from.
Yeah, it's essential to the plot. Yeah. So, you know, you could do that stuff on a grander scale then for some reason. Yeah. And now,
nowadays,
especially...
Nowadays it feels like slavery movies are only allowed to have, like, kind of two speeds where it's, you know, kind of a, you know, it's your Django Unchained where it's like slavery is a bad thing, but we deal with it kind of like a cartoon villain.
Yeah.
And then you have 12 Years a Slave, which is like just, no, let's get fucking serious.
Yeah.
Like, and Candyman is like one of the few movies where it's like this specter of slavery is a problem now.
Yeah.
Like it's contemporary. The specter of everything that's like the whole point of Candyman in that sense is like, no. The ghost of slavery is kind of still haunting us and still sort of stalking America, and still doing damage.
See, this is a movie I should go back and rewatch because I think I watched it before I would have
Clive
even been perceptive of that.
Yeah, Clive Barker's movies always have a little bit of a kind of a political edge to them when you don't expect it, and they're all very moody in that way. Like, what was it, Nightbreed?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nightbreed in a lot of ways. If you read into Nightbreed, it's about a guy coming. Yeah, in essence, it's very allegorical, and it's about a guy coming. It's about the experience of like coming to grips with being gay and finding a gay community kind of in the nightlife, and and dealing with just sort of the mainstream world coming into like crack down on the gay community and demonizing you for something you can't help. And Clive Barker is a gay man.
Yeah.
And he's a gay man who made that movie in the 80s. When, it was like...
Nightbreed's the 90s.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
It's the 90s.
That's right. Nightbreed was like 90s.
In fact, I was trying to watch a horror movie every day during October, and I watched, I think, 5 horror movies. But...
Well, October is only 6 days long, so you were okay.
Yeah, I got most of it. I just got to get that last, 12-something-teen%.
Yes.
No, but I started watching Nightbreed because my friend worked on the recent, restored director's cut. He was an editor, and
cool.
And so I was like, I to myself, I should watch this, see what my friend worked on, and just the first, I didn't get to finish it. And the first thing I remember thinking was like, oh shit, this is 90s as fuck. Like,
yeah.
I was like,
David Cronenberg as the evil psychiatrist.
Yeah, yes. And not 90s in a bad way, but it was like, oh, like I can definitely tell a 90s movie from this.
Well, I mean, it doesn't help that like Clinton walks by in the background of every shot.
Also true.
It's just like the alien inside, just stepping by.
Yeah, but see, like the thing about Clive Barker is like Clive. I get the sense that there's something about like since he comes from literature.
Yeah.
Like he was writing these things, and it's a different.
He comes from
think about the
literature.
Format differently. He always seems like he
comics
has...
and video games with Clive Barker's Jericho by Clive Barker.
I still laughed at that.
Yeah.
Because everything is called Clive Barker's, but like he's one of those guys I think has earned the worth of putting your name over. Like
yeah. Because
I apologize. That's harsh, but
you know what a Clive Barker's anything is.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone says Clive Barker's fucking Oral-B toothbrush. You know you know what to expect from this toothbrush.
This will probably be sort of gothic. Probably have like a sexuality about it. It'll be sort of like probing and sort of sacrilegious in some way. Like I don't know. He's got enough of his own aesthetic style that putting Clive Barker's on it definitely denotes a thing. Whereas if I just put my name on something, no one would know what that means.
Well, your famous deli is really popular.
That's true. I don't think I am a good indication of like the deli life, like sort of like giant sandwiches and like a bowling alley next door. Like I'm not that like all the time to be like, hey, come on down to Jerry's. Like, so it would still, if it was me, my face, people would be like, oh, I don't know what this place is about. There'll probably be like some guy in the corner spinning a vinyl record and Civil War beards. I don't know, but Clive Barker. I mean, like he's always felt a bit separate to me from the rest of like the guys like Wes Craven or Tobe Hooper or any of the different sort of horror cinema directors. These guys who made a lot of horror movies. Like Clive Barker always seems like he's always a little bit darker and a little more
I feel like Clive
subversive.
Barker and John Carpenter kind of like complement each other really well.
Well, because Clive Barker's almost like the more the guy who's kind of willing to say anything in a more aggressive way, whereas I feel like John Carpenter just kind of says it like it is and with a shrug.
With a shrug.
Like, because he's a very John Carpenter's a very sort of not no bullshit, but he's just kind of a guy. Yeah. And you get why he would be the author of these films, but in a sort of mellow, sort of kind of way.
Yeah. Like, well, I mean, I guess you can make the I don't know, like, compared to, like, They Live, which is very political, but also still in a very pulpy, campy way.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was the beginning of a sentence.
No, it's like compare that to, like, Clive Barker's type of output.
Well, yeah. I mean, because Clive Barker would be pulpy in a different way. Because something like... not all of John Carpenter's movies have this, but, They Live has a fun quality to it. Even though, like, the intrigue and the sort of threatening parts do still feel threatening in that environment. Like, it's still kind of got a rhythm and, and an absurdity. Whereas Clive Barker is much more sort of gothic and straight ahead about things.
And gets melancholy.
Yeah. Melancholy, a little bit, markedly dark. So it's like Hellraiser is deliberately paced. But it's also going to show you some really striking, really bleak images. There's that character, I think, in the first one that's just all exposed muscle. Like...
Oh, in the first Hellraiser?
Yeah. Just skinless, And then, it's really creepy, bloody, like a very striking image.
Yeah. John...
and those themes, about the Cenobites in hell and, the sort of synthesis of pleasure and pain and,
Clive Barker's design sense is really intense and really interesting. You don't see things kind of like that anywhere else.
And I get sort
outside of I guess maybe like Todd McFarlane designs.
It's like I get
which aren't, they don't have the same kind of like Todd McFarlane designs don't have that same melancholy or that same sexuality to them.
Yeah, when I feel like part of that comes from...
There's some Todd McFarlane things that have like a lot of cheesecake to them.
What is what separates them?
Okay, so it's like,
is it like certain like characters?
Yeah, like, I mean, Clive Barker, when he deals with sexuality and horror in his imagery, it's all like very like S&M themed and very kind of, it's all very alien and kind of uncomfortable, whereas Todd McFarlane, when he deals with sexuality, he will just kind of combine gore with things that are more like traditionally sexy. Like, I saw one Todd McFarlane like statuette where it's like a sexed up Little Red Riding Hood as, looking like a Playboy model holding the big bad wolf, who's just like an actual wolf that's been disemboweled, and there's this bunch of entrails and a slimy grandma inside of them.
Okay.
So it's like the gore is there, the grotesquerie is there, but the sexuality is not.
Yeah. Is
there, but it's not combined with it in the same way as like a Clive Barker thing.
Well, yeah, it's like a Clive Barker one is less lurid and more, not psychiatric, but more like any sexuality that appears in a Clive Barker movie isn't made to be like, oh yeah,
it's meant to be alien.
Yeah, it's usually meant to be alien or it's
more
like
H.R. Geiger-y
almost.
Yeah.
It appeals to the darker side of your sexual desire, I guess.
Yeah.
And what that is. It's not fun in Clive Barker's world.
Yeah, it's almost like what H.R. Geiger does, where it's like sexuality feels mechanical and inhuman and dark and alien, and like it's actually not like it's something that's scary because it almost feels like an H.P. Lovecraft elder god. It's something that's big and unknowable and separate from you and possibly, if not sinister, its goals are totally unknowable.
And I think that's something about Clive, like it's a markedly Clive Barker thing with a lot of, it's like if you're comparing Clive Barker and John Carpenter, it's like Clive Barker seems very like introspective, or at least the nuggets that form those stories seem like they would all be very personal and sort of, dug up from his own psychology. Whereas a John Carpenter movie has a similar amount of insight, but in a more outward way. It's sort of like, it's still processed through his perception, but it's more of like a, if you take something like They Live, or I think even Big Trouble is like this. It's like, this is how I see this thing, this is how one part of the world.
Clive Barker's flaying himself apart inside out. John Carpenter's flaying the world apart outside in.
Yeah, and I mean, they both reach a relatable thing in the middle, because it's like, Clive Barker's flaying himself, but in a way where he's like, opening it up to engage it with you. So there's a certain, like, it's still stark and it's still uncomfortable, but it's it's also you're being guided through this world. Like there's a certain, not relatability, but it appeals to things that are kind of simmering beneath all of the the surface of all of us. Whereas John Carpenter is a little bit more like bringing it down to a more relatable level, or at least like taking a more relatable like point of view on things.
Totes relates.
Yeah, not like in like a, well, it's accessible, but it's like, I get it. Like, you know, you're taking a look at advertising and the sort of insidiousness of free market capitalism through this guy who's just a construction worker, man,
and a drifter,
and he's seen it kind of like it is, you know, and we're waking up with this guy in real time.
Yeah,
like it brings it to us, whereas Clive Barker kind of takes us down to a uncomfortable place in a different way. But they're still both like kind of with you, you know, during this experience. Unless all of that sounds woefully obtuse and nonsensical, in which case.
I mean, it's like, how else are you going to articulate stuff like this? Because it is so
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, you don't often end up discussing these things in that light.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, so Clive Barker, in terms of horror, like always had a different, you know, corner. Like Clive Barker is kind of a genre in and of itself to me, and you know, it shows.
Now imagine a Clive Barker haunt.
Oh boy,
because I imagine
it would probably hurt, but it would probably be oddly sexual.
Yeah, I feel like a Clive Barker haunt would have the pace and the tone and the mood of Alone, but the imagery of like a Horror Nights. And
well, yeah, and it would probably hurt more at some point. Because like, yeah, there's always something. They're always kind of bleak, and there's always something else going on. It's like I've never seen a silly Clive Barker movie, or at least a silly, like intentionally silly.
Oh my god!
I haven't seen
Clive Barker
an
movie.
Unintentionally, but I've never seen one that's like, hey,
Clive Barker remakes The Jerk.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I can't imagine what that. It would be interesting, and he seems like a personable enough guy. But you know, it's like, whereas a lot of the other, you know, Candyman's often lumped in with slashers and stuff like that. But Candyman does not feel like watching a Jason movie or Freddy movie or even a Michael Myers movie after a certain point.
Because it's also, the Candyman is incorporeal. He's anywhere and everywhere. I guess the Candyman is also more like The Ring in that way, where it's haunting you, but it's not physical.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily like that's not as American of a, you know, place to draw from, because a lot of Japanese horror does have that. Yeah. Sort of quality where it's like a person being haunted by something very specific
and very almost like spiritual.
Yeah, and you can sort of find that like there's like I saw Midnight Meat Train, and you know you hear of a movie called Midnight Meat Train that stars Bradley Cooper and Vinnie Jones.
I imagine it's about like some like guys working the graveyard shift at a butcher shop in Philly, and just some wacky shit that has to go on. It all takes place over the course of one night.
That is not what this movie is like.
I know, because it's a horror movie.
Yeah. I would watch that, though. We'll star in it.
Yeah.
Midnight Meat Train.
Midnight Meat Train.
But, you know,
hey, Jerry, we gotta move these hams.
We gotta get these rump roasts across town.
Mom, Jerry, my chick, she's pregnant. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
We gotta move this meat.
That's Midnight Meat Train.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of mournful Seeger playing over like nighttime city skylines where it looks kind of industrial.
It's just them both airing out their woes and then both agreeing that they can't do anything about it right now because they gotta move the meat.
They gotta move the meat. It all takes place on this one train.
And then it just becomes a sad metaphor for the monotony of life. All of your most important situations like are elsewhere while you're just moving the meat.
It's like that Tom Hardy movie where he plays a construction project manager, and it all takes place with him driving in his car.
Oh, Locke.
Yeah.
I wanted to see that!
I want to see it too.
I want to see it a lot.
But tell me what you were going to say about the actual Midnight Meat Train.
But Midnight Meat Train, like, you hear the title and you're like, oh, that sounds, you know, it sounds like a schlocky, like a, you know, aggressive sort of, like, new metal in your face, you know, slasher movie or something.
Like Bradley Cooper's got cyber dreads.
Maybe not that far, but you know, like, you know,
not that new metal.
Maybe something more along the line of like a Jeepers Creepers era movie where it's just like, you know, a lot of people are gonna get on this train and get slaughtered. Like,
oh no,
you know, and you know, some kind of plucky hero is gonna, you know, unravel it. Like, like, you could argue that it could go there, but then you see it and you're like, Bradley Cooper plays a photographer and he,
What's he doing on a train? He's not meat.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's something about that movie that there's a lot more to it than just a dude who slays people on the train at night. That's a part of it, and there is some there is some gore. There's always gore in a Clive Barker movie. But it's not like bro-y gore, or it's not like super polished high-gloss studio gore. It's, sort of stark and a little in your face. But there's also like a very sort of dready, sinister thing going on underneath it. So that's a movie a lot of people saw and went, oh, this is actually pretty good. Like, this is a pretty good movie. Like, because it didn't get nearly the amount of,
I know I've seen
release
it on the Netflix reel a few times. Just kind of sitting there. And I didn't realize it was a Clive Barker movie. I was just like, oh, what is this? I may have seen Clive Barker and thought, oh, it's one of those Clive Barker Presents type things, isn't it?
Yeah. No, this is based on one of his stories.
Yeah.
And he hasn't directed all of his movies, but... Did
he direct Jericho?
Yes, he did. And he'll play it with you online for free.
Like Vin Diesel.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Playing his last Witch Hunter movie.
Hey, man, if this gets more people interested in Dungeons & Dragons,
I was at... I go to funny school.
Okay.
And I was at my funny school class. No, I'm in the conservatory at one of the name improv theaters in LA right now. And I was in class today, jamming with my cohort, and we had one of the instructors, and we ended up chatting because he's apparently way into Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't get because he's just this...
Is he a mage?
I don't know, but he was like this big... Because he doesn't seem like what you think of when you think Dungeons and Dragons, because he's like big, brash, butterball, loud guy.
Okay.
Who's like very, out there and abrupt and kind of like a force to be reckoned with comedically.
Okay.
You don't just imagine a guy who's like that big and confident to be way into Dungeons and Dragons. The same way you don't exactly expect Vin Diesel to be into Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, well,
I guess if you're into improv and you're in like if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, then improv will bounce off of that the same way it did for like Stephen Colbert, just because, or with Vin Diesel, it's like the role playing leads you into acting.
Yeah,
that way.
And I feel like maybe improv, sort of is more in that Venn diagram than you'd think, because really improv is the LARPing of comedy.
Yeah.
So I imagine like a nerdy type who might be inclined to play Dungeons and Dragons would probably be most inclined to do improv.
Improv is...
The neurotic ones will do stand-up,
yeah.
And then the rest of us will do sketch.
Yeah.
The more methodical types will do sketch.
Improv is LARPing for an audience.
Yeah, it's LARPing that people actually want to go participate in.
Yeah. We were improvising this scene that was basically like a bunch of kids that were way into Dungeons and Dragons had to do community service for some reason. And I came by as like the angry yard duty that was like... Which way you shits fired a magic missile at the trash cans by the locker room? And then I was like, and it's like they got all nervous. I was like, God damn, magic missile's so overpowered. And the instructor was just, he joked and like let it be known that he knew in which editions of Dungeons and Dragons magic missile was actually overpowered and when it was balanced.
Oh,
and that was hilarious to me.
So you're getting towards the edge of where I start losing the D&D references because I'm so uninitiated. But
I just know that magic missile is a spell.
Yeah,
I just know it's a spell one can cast.
Did you know that was a spell, or did you just throw out a term?
I just heard it. I've heard magic missile, and I assumed. Well, that sounds like a very like baseline spell. I just assumed it was in like Dungeons and Dragons because I saw videos of. I've seen videos of kids LARPing and just looking ridiculous in the woods, and they use like little fireworks to stand in for magic spells sometimes. And like one kid was like firing off a little popper and just saying "magic missile" as if he was casting this firework. I saw another one with a kid throwing cardboard lightning bolts at somebody and just shouting out "lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt!" And he's throwing these little cardboard lightning bolts at somebody.
I feel like LARPing would be so much more accessible to people if it just wasn't called LARPing.
Yeah.
Because LARPing, like
that's just not a pretty word.
Yeah, it's just kind of lumpy and unpleasant, and it sounds like the combination of certain, like, bathroom words Just like Nebula's bathroom.
Yeah.
Just LARPing. Like, LARPing sounds like you should be, like, barfing and pooping at the same time. Like that. Like,
oh, dude, you totally LARPed all over my couch.
Dude. I got food poisoning, bro. I'm LARPing everywhere. Like, it sounds unpleasant a little bit. And so, like, LARPing, it doesn't help you out as a word. It's not a word, you know, it's not doing you any favors. I get that it's an acronym, but maybe, like, you know.
It was interesting that Lair was
organized sword and sandling.
Yeah.
You know, is I don't know.
It was interesting in Role Model's Lair being the fake LARPing.
LARPing? Is that what they called it?
No, it was just called Lair, Lair, like live action interactive role play experience, which is basically just like LARP but with a fake acronym.
Yeah.
So
it is. Oh, is LARP like an actual?
Yeah, live action role play.
But is that an actual, like, has somebody trademarked that and turned it into
LARP
an official
is just
thing? Okay.
I just, for whatever reason, they used a fake term for it in Role Models.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not certain why.
Let's do this, we shall!
Thank you, Joe
Joe Latrulio. I've been watching Charlie, who you all will meet soon, was showing me some episodes of The State.
The State.
And, like, holy shit,
Have you seen Louis?
Wait, which one's Louis?
Louis. He's the guy who says his classic catchphrase over and over again.
Yes. Oh, shit. What is it?
I want to dip my balls in it. He pulls out 2 actual ping pong balls.
I was thinking of a different character, but yes, I know exactly who that is.
So they just had this character named Louis, and it was just they introduced every Louis sketch by like celebrating how he's gonna say his catchphrase. And he's a guy who just says, I want to dip my balls in it. His catchphrase is absolutely absurd. He pulls out a pair of ping pong balls.
Oh, man.
Why is this?
Ryan and I just watched the Christmas episode of BoJack Horseman again.
Oh, boy.
And
how does Ryan like BoJack?
He hadn't really seen it. And so we were doing, like, the maiden voyage of a... We're doing, like, the first episode of something we're starting up. And or we were asked to participate in, that basically you have to watch something on Netflix. So it was like, he was like, I know you're interested in that. I've only seen the first couple episodes, and this is an isolated one, so we won't have to worry about like doing a whole season, blah blah blah, or at least creating that misconception. So it was just like, for the maiden voyage, let's do something contained. So we watched the Christmas special. And it made me think of that too. It's just like his catchphrase that just won't happen. The brothers.
Yowza wowza bo bowza.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one reject kid.
And just the one dude in the back of the audience who's always yelling out like
the worst thing.
The worst thing and the like exact intended desire of whatever line he's just reacting to. He just did the thing he said he wasn't gonna do earlier.
Yes.
Like, and it's just playing on the same thing. It's just like, I'm gonna dip my balls in that. It's just like, here's a really stupid catchphrase. And like, Rick and Morty does that too, is with wubba lubba dub dub.
What is that?
It's Rick's catchphrase, which we then learn is not actually a joyous catchphrase. It's an admission. It's in a different language and is the admission of great pain.
Oh shit.
It is... Bird Person explains that in one episode. He's like, no, wubba lubba dub dub is actually in the language of my people, and it means help me, I am in great pain.
Oh god.
Like, so it's like an actual kind of sad moment there. But yeah, I'm gonna dip my balls in it. It's like, yeah, I don't.
So, from guns to Alone.
Yeah, no, it was gonna wrap back around, and then I forgot
Clive Barker.
how it got into Clive Barker. We were talking about found footage trailers.
Yeah.
And then we sort of got into jokes, and then we got into this.
Jokes?
Yes. Yeah, no.
Well,
let's trace it back. The State. Put my balls in it.
Put my balls in the State, in Clive Barker.
How did we get on the catchphrase conversation?
From the State.
Oh, okay. But before that, why did we get on the State?
I don't know.
Oh, Joe Latrulio LARPing.
Yeah.
Okay. No, because I had a point I was going to make, and it was somewhere buried in one of the earlier arguments.
Oh.
I think, because Save the Cat, I mean, I don't remember when it came out exactly, like 2005 or maybe even before.
I feel like the first edition of Save the Cat was earlier than that.
Yeah, maybe even. Because if you look at the way movies started to go around that time is when we started having every movie be Joseph Campbell or be, the hero's journey, be this structure.
Yeah, the
like
Hollywood,
less movies.
The Hollywood version of Joseph Campbell, which is not exactly the monomyth.
Yeah. But, the Hollywood standard, Save the Cat now is now is the most recent version, that structure. It's like you can sort of see that shift, I think, away from movies that maybe don't have them.
Yeah.
So, like, now the only person who can get a big budget movie made that doesn't follow that kind of a structure is usually Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, somebody who was established as a still marketable auteur before that axe fell.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like Quentin Tarantino movies. It's like they don't follow that structure, but he's done that. He doesn't follow that structure every time.
And sometimes it's like, Quentin Tarantino will follow his own structure, which is fine, but I will say that at times, like, there are things in Quentin Tarantino movies I feel like they're a little bit baggy.
Yeah,
like the very last leg of Django Unchained felt like it dragged a little bit, the whole bit with the Australians.
See, I get the argument about Django because everyone's like, it should have ended the first time. We shouldn't have to have him go back and it should have ended somewhere, close to, once they've basically been found out and they're about to leave Candyland. It's like, that's where it kind of should have ended, like after that whole shootout and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's like, for the thrill and for the satisfaction of like a movie experience, then but I guess that's the problem with that movie structure is he has to go back alone and do all that alone. So like the last half of the movie or the last, chunk of the movie is necessary.
Yeah, you need that whole thing of, Django not having his... Because, I mean, the Django Unchained suffers from white savior complex really badly. And so it's like... To at the very least make up for that a little bit, you have to have Django go without his white savior.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, some of his movies fall into that, which I think is definitely a structural thing. But some of them, do just fine. Like, there are far less visible blemishes without a more traditional structure, But... I feel like you can sort of start to chart that because around the time Save the Cat started to hit, I think we did sort of gravitate towards just movies that weren't necessarily that. Because in the 90s, you still had movies that didn't necessarily seem like the standard. I mean, they probably shared certain standard beats. They weren't like all super out there. But, just it didn't seem like things were as beholden until Save the Cat really started to hit.
And it feels like in past movies, even if they did hit those beats, they hit those beats really differently. Like, I remember The Matrix. As I think about it, I was like, no, The Matrix more or less follows that plot, but it hits every beat differently than how you think it would.
Yeah.
Than, like, a movie today would hit those same beats.
Yeah, and I mean...
Like, there's an awful lot of stuff in the middle of The Matrix that's just talking.
Yeah.
That isn't, like... obligatory action sequences.
Well, and the amount of psychology...
There are big obligatory action sequences, but they're not in the order that you would expect with today's structure.
Yeah, and I mean, you get their relevance based on film history and the kind of story it is. Mm. But, like, I think also just the level of psychology you put into the writing, which isn't necessarily like it's not necessarily like a structural prowess, but I feel like if you take that structure and fill it with a lot of life, that can make up for the structure because now there's something to think about and something to connect to on it.
Ironically, I just remembered The Matrix was another movie where the writers name-checked Joseph Campbell. But that's interesting because they name-checked Joseph Campbell. That means they probably went back to the source. They went back to Hero with a Thousand Faces or The Hero's Journey. They went back to Campbell himself rather than Campbell as distilled through other movies and other people writing about how to write movies.
Well, here's the thing, though, too, is that, that's a more literary book. It's like if they...
Yeah, it's more literary. It's a work of anthropology. It's not a work of how to do creative writing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's thick, and, like, you gotta want to read it.
Yeah.
Whereas... So I imagine you would get something a bit more involved, a bit more meticulous, and a bit more... a bit more worthwhile, I guess, on that structure because it's to read that book. It's an anthropological and it's a thoughtful experience. I would imagine, as it's a discourse.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Save the Cat, not to fully be like, "Nah," but like something like Save the Cat, it's a thin book, it's easy to read, and it's basically going, if you want to write a successful Hollywood movie, here's how you do it. It's like that's not the attitude that's coming out of, or at least that I get out of Hero of a Thousand Faces, or the hero's journey. And that's not even something I necessarily get out of Story or...
Story feels like... I mean, there are whole chapters in Story devoted to the idea of multiple different kinds of plots.
Yeah, and I mean, and those books, even though they
different kinds
are...
of plot structures.
Even though they are about writing a script, that you can make something out of, they're still focused on the craft, it feels like. Whereas Save the Cat reads sort of like, here's what you need to know to get the successful movie made, and here's how it works in all these other movies. Like, I get why it's done so well, because it's more of a marketer's screenwriting book than it is just about the craft. It's like, it's not how to make your craft good, it's how to make your craft work. It feels and like that attitude. It
feels like Save the Cat is a book on how to write, written for people who don't write or necessarily want to go with the brain space of writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a literary book that way. It's more like, here's the structure, and if you can fill it properly, you can write a script. Yeah. Like, it's not quite so, at least, screamingly like, anyone can do it, but basically that's what it's saying, is sort of, here's the structure, here's how it's worked in countless movies, and, you have a really good chance of getting this sold if you can just follow that structure. And I feel like it's kind of sad, and maybe this isn't the case, but, it feels kind of sad to think that the most marketable book and the book that pitched it like how to make this work, in quotes, is the one that has left its fingerprints so apparently all over everything.
Rather the ones that are about, well, let's think deeply about this and actually kind of look at the nuance and how stories have worked in people over thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, it's like, even if
distill this to more of a philosophical essence rather than like, a bulleted list. Yeah, or even just, it's even in some of the books that aren't, quite as philosophical, it's still like, yeah, maybe put it into this 3-act structure with certain designated beats, but here's why, and here's the craft of it all, and it seems like it comes from a more constructive place, like it's concerned with figuring out screenwriting, whereas this is, concerned with figuring out Hollywood success, Yeah, which are different things.
Yeah. And now I'm very curious to read writing movies for fun and profit.
Yeah, because that's even like right on the tin it says.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I can imagine there's a certain, it probably will, but it's also, from guys who know how insidious that can be.
Yeah.
The State, hey.
Yeah.
But yeah, the promise of Save the Cat.
Tom Lennon and Robert Ben Garant.
Yeah.
Garant.
Girl. But yeah, like I feel like you can kind of maybe put that roadblock or that checkpoint, that bookmark at where Save the Cat starts to hit. Because now we do have a bunch of the same movie.
Yeah.
And a bunch of the same trailers for that movie.
Yeah.
And then the cool stuff is happening away from that structure.
They're making the movie again.
Yeah. But I just saw last week's movie.
That's basically what it feels like. It feels like you're not going to a theater and seeing a bunch of different movies. You're going to a theater and seeing a bunch of different remakes of the same movie. Sometimes that movie has Iron Man, sometimes it has Batman, sometimes it has Liam Neeson. Sometimes it's in space, sometimes it isn't.
Sometimes it's giant robots and it loves America.
Yeah.
Transformers.
Yeah. I will say...
I watched all my movies. Some of it.
How was it?
Well, I got something out of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I had it on in the office. I was just sort of chilling, watching Shia LaBeouf out of one corner of my eye. I don't know, especially when I got to Even Stevens. Just like, just watching a guy...
Wait, he was watching all of Even Stevens too?
The movie.
Oh,
they made it like a TV movie or something like that.
Okay.
It was always films. So like going from, I think he did something right after Fury, like all the way from most recent to first.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's like 3 straight days in this New York theater, and it just took a webcam on him and some of the room as he watched these movies. But there was something I found oddly soothing about just watching a guy watch and react. Like you know, there were times when he'd be falling asleep, or there would be times where you could tell he really wasn't enjoying the movie he was watching. And then, like, during Even Stevens, he looked so happy. Like, he was laughing so hard, and at one point he was, like, laughing and kind of tearing up, and it was just like, oh, this is an interesting sort of thing. And like, it was so long that it stopped being... I don't know, it felt kind of authentic to me, like he actually wanted to be there versus, you know, not like a, yeah.
How do you look when he was watching Nymphomaniac?
I didn't see it that early, unfortunately, because that was the first day, and I think I caught it partway through the second.
Oh, okay.
So, I watched something that he really wasn't into, and then, you know, some of the ones were a little more normal.
What was he really not into?
I'm trying to guess, because I only caught up with, I only found, like, a schedule of the movies on the, you know, like, on the last day, but it may have been like a Transformers or something, because like in all the write-ups they're like, at one point he looks like visibly kind of like he's not enjoying this at all. And I know he wasn't. I think he left for an hour during one of the Transformers movies or something. Yeah, he was just not down. I'm sure somebody on the internet has logged it, but I don't know. I don't know. I kind of dug that. Just to kind of glance over at Shy as he's watching something he was in, you know. And it's just like, I don't know, in a weird way, it's like watching a guy. I can see how there might be some kind of genuine value in like watching a guy watch himself, and sort of like how existential that must be to watch yourself get younger on screen, and like how you've been different over the years. And clearly it would only have a specific context to him, but like, you know, there's something interesting to watch that context play out in his face, you know. So, I don't know. It's cool. Yeah, 4 out of 5.
Would you recommend it to friends?
You know, check it out.
Here's what should happen. He should have recorded all my movies, put out a DVD, and then do a second all my movies where he watches all my movies. I was gonna piggyback on that, and it was just too whimsical in my mind. So well done, you've defeated me. You defeated me with humor. Round 1, Vitcory.
Vitcory. Round 1 with Corey. Well, it's been a day.
It's been a dank.
We're gonna hopefully have a guest star on the next dank, so get ready for that. Put your guest pants on.
Yeah.
Because we got company, and we don't want you to be walking around in your long johns, you know.
Yeah,
it's cold outside.
You're entertaining now.
Yeah, we're entertaining, all right. And you know, we're not strict.
You have a guest.
We have a cotillion in this household that we like to, you know, keep on a tight march there.
Yep. So
it's an odd household we live in.
So from everyone here at
Dank Studios.
At Dank Studios, I am Aaron.
I am Jerry.
And you are amazing. And stay dank.
Stay dank. Amazing people.